Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second University of Nebraska No Name Reading Series of the semester. We have an exciting second lineup for you. Oh, Nebraska No Name Reading Series of the semester. Oops, sorry about that. So tonight we have Oh-vee Chaudhuri, Ilana Masad, and Alex Ramirez. And they will be reading some of their fiction for you. So I'll be hosting tonight. Katie Maria's in the background doing all the fancy tech stuff. And the lineup is Oh-vee, Ilana, and we're going to end with Alex. So without further ado, we're just going to get started here. So we're going to begin with Oh-vee. And a little bit about him. Oh-vee Chaudhuri is from Wichita, Kansas. He is a fiction editor for Prairie Schooner, and he is currently claiming to write a novel called Roof Drinking in America. So let's give it up for Oh-vee.
Thank you, Jamaica. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Before I start my reading, I just want to say I'm deeply appreciative to all the organizers for No Name. They dropped off this bottle of Tullamore Dew earlier today, and they left a very nice note. Dear Oh-vee, thank you for reading. Please enjoy this moderately priced bottle of whiskey. We encourage you to drink it prior to, during, and certainly after tonight's reading. Our best, Jamaica, Jess, Jonathan, and Katie. So very, I think a very sweet gesture, very touching in these parlous times that we live in. So I'm going to read a story about, I guess, being an uncle. This is called the Regency era. After 4 months without a phone call or letter, our Uncle Gage returned to Portland on Christmas Eve with a cocktail waitress he had covered head to toe in fresh mud. He'd done the same to himself, except he'd added a humble sash of maple leaves and was also wearing a helmet made of twigs and possibly bird shit and a child's cape. Mom screamed until Grandpa fixed her a drink. Dad took pictures on his vintage camera, all the while insisting that, yes, darling, God damn it, the carpet could be salvaged. I'm back, kids, our uncle said. I'm back from fighting in the troll wars. I began as an anonymous soldier of fortune, and now I'm the king's chief military advisor. What does that mean? My sister asked. Well, my uncle said, it means I hold very high office, that I drink champagne and eat caviar. The women of the court entertain me in my bedchamber at night, but most of them can't even play a decent game of checkers. But this one, she's going to be my wife. No one remembers that girl's name anymore. She stayed 2 nights, then was disappeared by Grandma with $200 cash and a train ticket to Seattle. According to our uncle, the troll kingdom could be found through the crawl space under Grandpa's house, and that's where he admitted to having been for the last several months, soldiering for the armies of a mythical king in a mythical land under a contested easement of West Oregon hill country. Why were you fighting? We asked our uncle. Well, he said, trolls are covetous of women, human women, and goat meat. Now, the term genocide has been used by my more liberal enemies at court in a uniformly reckless fashion, mind you. But for the record, we tried to put the troll children in re-education camps, but there was a drought. Treasury ran out of money, and you can imagine the rest. In the final analysis, it was simply easier to put them all to death. We sat at the kitchen table while he made us peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and continued to analyze his role in an underreported, subterranean ethnic cleansing. Then we played Monopoly with extra money and an absurdly low APR until it was time to clear the table for dinner. He'd let my sister choose a beer for him from Dad's garage refrigerator, And after the plates were cleared away, I got to pour him a tumbler of scotch and bring his organic cigarettes to him in the backyard, where he pointed out various constellations. You see up there, that's Narwhal, the giant fish god. He mates in the Pacific. That's why it's warmer than the Atlantic. It takes a lot of whales, both bulls and cows. He's a bisexual, you see, to satisfy him. At least 100 alone to fillet him from stem to stern. The breadth of his Antigua-sized phallus. Our uncle enjoyed using words we didn't know at the time. He stayed with us for the rest of winter and most of the spring and summer until his arrest. Grandpa gave him a per diem for cigarettes and whiskey and used paperback novels. He helped with the gutters and with tearing out the old fiberglass insulation, which he made into dolls, and he left them at the playground since he hated other children. He cooked with Grandma, chopped vegetables with her, diced the 5 or 6 onions she required daily, minced garlic, and gutted fish that he caught illegally on the banks of the Columbia River. After spring, our uncle took what my father called an unhealthy interest in our education. He said our creative faculties were being neglected by a fascist curriculum. A few days later, he threatened the principal of our elementary school at the weekly farmers market, reaching into Dr. Breckenridge's cart and squeezing an eggplant until it exploded in lumps over a nearby box of kale from the high desert. To fill the creative void, our uncle said we should start a family band, until he actually heard us sing, and then he dismissed the idea angrily, leaving the house to stumble around the neighborhood and curse God for placing him in the same genus as such pitchy, untalented children. He was clearly a very disturbed man, but also incredibly decent at times. He always took us to the water park when we asked him, but not before a trip to the library, where he'd waltz among the stacks picking our summer reading list. Dostoevsky for a 9 and 10-year-old did not strike him as particularly odd. He was convinced we were as dark and brooding as he was, in spite of our pastel swimsuits and translucent water guns. At the checkout counter, he'd flirt with a girl who was studying library sciences at Portland State, and she'd join us later at the pub. My sister and I would drink orange sodas, and my uncle and Suzanne would guzzle beer, and he'd talk her into several shots of Irish whiskey. Then he'd drive us home and deposit us on the front steps, not even waiting for Mom to come to the door, and he'd speed off with Suzanne in the navigator's seat. We found his receipts when we did his laundry, and they told us he'd gone gambling up north in the great Indian country, land of snow crab, salad, and bottomless mimosas, land of regret and quarantine, of pilfered 2-in-1 shampoo conditioner, land invariably of Suzanne, Carol, Alice, Parvini, wailing, having to pawn jewelry or wire in cash to cover my uncle's blackjack debts. He always returned home in a much cheerful mood, though. That summer, when school finally let out and our bedtimes were extended by parental statute, our uncle would serve faithfully as custodian of lightning bugs. And with his gut heaving and his hysterical leer, he was an ideal second mate for whenever we fought off an English boarding party on the Spanish galleon in the backyard, an old fir tree that our dad had hanged indifferently with boards and nails and too much hemp rope. Sadly, in spite of being a good zookeeper and villain and an excellent fixer for taboo items like candy straws and R-rated movies, they came for him one hot July day while he was making fireworks in Grandpa's garage. For an afternoon anyway, it seemed like he was the most wanted man in Oregon. First, Child Protective Services arrived sheepishly, skeptically really, to verify impossible reports of a madman leaving fiberglass dolls for children at the playground. Then the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife intruded and produced dozens of transcribed eyewitness accounts of a shirtless, heavy-set Christ figure, offering to gut fish and perform circumcisions in the Columbia River Gorge. All this he allegedly did while fishing without a license. And finally, 2 sheriff's deputies descended on this scene, by now a hot, overcrowded garage teeming with curious children and bureaucrats, to arrest him on the simple, straightforward charge of assault. Apparently, our uncle had paid Principal Breckenridge a visit at his home and broken his jaw in 2 places. While serving his prison term, our uncle would correspond with us regularly through Grandma. He assigned us 10-page essays on Dostoevsky that had to be in correct MLA format, and also encouraged us to form a mixed doubles tennis team. He referred to Breckenridge as a, quote, false witness. One letter recounted his love of gardening. Another provided detailed instructions on how to place his wagers at Portland Meadows, which is a horse track. We never wrote those essays or consulted the MLA handbook because our Renaissance childhood, or whatever it turned out to be, ended the day our regent was led away laughing, hands and face covered in a fine, sulfurous dust. Other things were happening too. My sister had to go shopping for training bras. 6 months later, I took a circuitous, forested route to Grandpa's house to steal our uncle's collection of vintage pornography that he had hid in the upstairs linen closet. On a routine trip to the town center to buy clementines and formula for the baby, Mom dropped off the Dostoevsky at the library, where Suzanne gave her a look, and all was forgotten. After he got out of prison early for good behavior, we heard occasional reports about our uncle's whereabouts. He had moved east to complete a master's degree. He telephoned Mom on her 40th birthday, and they talked literally about the price of red bell peppers. When we were teenagers, we went to stay with him while visiting prospective colleges in New England. He had a nice condo in the neighborhood with cobblestone streets and a martini bar at the end of the block. Neither of us recognized him. Gone was the unruly beard. He was slimmer now, thanks largely to a hybrid elliptical bike machine he had purchased from Sky Mall while flying to Topeka for a business conference. He spent most of dinner congratulating himself for the meal he had prepared. Yellow squash julienned to resemble pasta and tossed in extra virgin olive oil and low-fat Parmesan cheese. "It tastes just like spaghetti," he said, "but you don't get all the carbohydrates." After dinner, rather than having a scotch and his usual cigarette, he made himself a cup of herbal tea and told us about life as an actuary. I thought he would finally embellish a little. "Well, kids, I use my degree in computational physics to assess the likelihood that a team of Australian treasure hunters, led by a buxom blonde Oxford graduate, have discovered Atlantis. Then I relay this information to an anonymous billionaire who wants to corner the market in large-scale excavation machinery and begin a third world war." Nothing of the kind. Instead, he went on about organic fertilizer and crop diversification. In fact, I'm not sure it happened at all. A calm, rational dinner with my uncle, a meal exempt from diatribe, a meal that did not double as an opportunity to plot against Mom or teach some new form of gambling. It's all simply too fantastical to believe. What's more likely, I consider this sincerely, is that the man we met in Providence was an imposter, hired by our uncle to imitate him, to impersonate him, and convince Grandpa and Grandma that their only son, shouter of frequent claims to their Roth IRAs, had finally gone straight. But the truth is that he's down there somewhere. A mercenary turned statesman, a drifter turned viceroy and lord protector of the realm, far below the expandable clay soils of Grandpa's house, beneath Grandpa's house, the foundation of which is a rent firmament for a kingdom of irretrievable magic, my uncle is finally father of a nation.
Thank you so much, Oh-vee. That was wonderful. I think we're just going to move on. So our next reader is Ilana Masad. She is a fiction writer and book critic and the author of the novel All My Mother's Lovers. Welcome, Ilana.
Thank you so much, Jamaica. Hello, everyone. I can't stop waving, even though I hear that this is extremely uncool, but that's okay. I think it's okay to be uncool sometimes. That's what I'm telling myself. Thank you so much to the No Name organizers. And I'm going to read two flash fiction pieces. The first one's a real bummer, and the second one is less of a bummer. So that's why I'm starting with the bummer one. The marionette speaks for itself. When the rotten log of me jumped, my first father gave me away. I started with a kick and a run. Not far enough. Second father was just next door, and he planned to put me to work. Wanted me to get an education, too, but what use would that be, I thought, as I sold my first school book for a ticket to see the puppet show. If I was to work in the theater, too, one day, after training and grooming and some measure of pain, needles were sharp, and how else would I acquire the strings necessary for my kind of labor? Better to see what my future held. Somewhere in the rings of my stomach was the memory of a sharp axe, a teeter and a fall, a wrenching from everything that once fed me. Can you blame me for trying to find other nourishment? No one tells this part of my story, the reason I fell for the promises of wily men, foxes, cats, fairies. So let me set the record straight. For years on end, I starved. And if there is one thing I shared with the mammals and magical creatures, it was that hunger made me weak, my every decision fueled by desperation. My anger at being fooled and lied to rose quickly and burned out just as fast, leaving me with lessons half learned and soon forgotten in the face of a new promise, a new way to fill the emptiness. Tell me, do they mention this in their versions? Do they describe the isolation of rootlessness, the terror of being unable to sense the vastness of kin? Do they explain that I made the only choices I could under the circumstances I was thrust into? No. Instead, it is now their turn to lie, to condemn. Bold-faced and sharp-nosed and unashamed, they make the worst proclamation of all. They say I wanted to be a real boy. Consider, please, what kind of boy I would be. One whose first father dropped him on his head and gave away as if worthless to his neighbor. One whose second father planned to use as a golden goose. One who wandered the streets like the motherless orphan I was, only to be taken advantage of by any living, unmoored beast with a scheme, a wink, and a distracting whistle. If I were ever to be a real boy, it would be the kind you forget about, leave in the streets, cast your eyes away from as you walk by his begging bowl. I would be the kind whose small and ripe body would learn to turn with feigned desire towards the leering eyes of grown men, whose gold was good enough to bite. I would be the kind to die soon, my body unclaimed. What I wanted, and what I finally managed, was to return home. I burrowed in the earth and I waited. It took such a very long time to crumble, to finish the rotting I'd begun when first father found me. But eventually, I scattered, bits of me replenishing the earth, finding their way into new growth. I live now. Look outside. The first green thing you see surely includes some of me. All right, that was that one. And the next one is called 6 Feet. The accounts popped up everywhere almost 4 weeks into quarantine, when we were fully saturated with content. Consuming it, judging it, making it, anything to pass the time between intrepid trips to the grocery store. The handle was 6 feet of separation on Instagram and at 6 feet of separation on Twitter, 6 slick feet on Grindr, and 6 feet and separate couple on Tinder. And on it went, but the images were the same and updated daily on all of them. Still photos of a nude body, maybe a woman, but we weren't sure. Their darkish, furry mons pubis below a soft, bulging stomach and small breasts with large nipples. Their body was always crisply in focus, but the face was blurry, a curious effect. Those who convened on r/6 feet of separation fans theorized the photographer was using long exposure shots and a model who stayed particularly still except for shaking their head. Few of us paid attention at first. There was so much going on, or so little, depending on our viewpoint and mood, and we were all thinking about other things, like how our grandmothers were doing, or our mothers, or our friends packed into coastal cities, or how we'd pay rent and what would happen when quarantine lifted alongside the moratorium on evictions. 6 feet, which is what they were called in the art blogs, then the think pieces in the queer media, and eventually the national papers, crept past all that in time through sheer persistence. Their nudity violated all the app's community guidelines, but their accounts, though repeatedly reported, people screenshotted and even filmed themselves doing it, never got taken down somehow. Maybe they paid for our traffic, or perhaps we were particularly suited, algorithmically speaking, to their content, but their photos started showing up more often on our feeds, in our timelines, over and over again in our area, no matter how often we swiped left. 6 feet was insistent on being seen. The photos were all taken at night, the only real lighting coming from yellow and orange and off-white street lamps. 6 feet, at some point it was collectively understood or decided that the model and the photographer were one and the same, was usually in the middle of a street between pools of light and parked cars accumulating dust. They posed as if in the midst of dancing. Arms raised and hip cocked, a leg lifted, one hand held to their chest, the other pointing. Elbows bent close, fingers in snapping position, ass thrust back, shoulders shimmied up. They always looked kind of awkward, we thought, but that was what we began to love about them most, their energy. Even though few of us had the courage to say it yet, something like joy. It didn't take as long as might have been expected for 6 feet to gain national attention. 7 weeks into quarantine, after a failed attempt at loosening it and a wave of strikes and stock market crashes and a new surge of illness and overcrowded hospitals and horrifying articles about doctors and nurses making triage decisions, and worst of all, the deaths. Even the hardiest of news editors were relieved to cover this new internet culture obsession, 6 feet, when they, entirely unexpectedly, pivoted to video. There were myriad discussions online about how they identified. They weren't white, that much was clear, though the lighting made it hard to pinpoint anything else definitively. And there were, of course, those obnoxious white people who argued that 6 feet was just tan. Many, including the national papers, kept referring to them as she, which we didn't, because we didn't know. Their age was debated often, with the occasionally panicked, what if this is technically child pornography question, though we rolled our eyes at this because it was obvious this was the body of someone who'd been through some life. The other hotly debated topic was their whereabouts. Web sleuths short on new material analyzing the debris occasionally seen at the edges of the photos between cars. A Buc-ee's wrapper implied Texas in one image, but then the corner of a distant neon light looming around a corner was deemed to be a Wawa, which one Redditor swore was the one near where he lived in Jersey. Video, everyone thought, would reveal the truth, finally. We all held our breath when we hit the triangle button that first time they posted something other than a still. Change was exciting for its own sake, but it was more than that. We all thought we'd finally be able to see 6 feet's face, their expression, maybe hear their voice. No. The video was 5 minutes and 24 seconds long. It soundtracked the album version of Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out, and it featured 6 feet dancing their heart and soul out, their bodies' nude flesh jiggling and jouncing under the warm glow of the streetlight, their face still an utter blur, impossible to make out. A car passes on the street perpendicular to the one they're dancing on at minute 3. And 6 feet turns and waves at it edit as they dance, secure for some reason, even in their vulnerable and seemingly unsafe nudity, that their personal space will be respected. In their next video, the song was We Are Family by Sister Sledge, then Dancing Queen by ABBA, then Freedom 90 by George Michael, and on it went. The internet and the papers decided that 6 Feet's face was blurred through some video editing technique. Of course, their anonymity an essential part of their art project. National and then niche attention and coverage faded, as they do. As for us, we're still watching 6 Feet, following their work and wondering. Many of us theorize that they never edit their videos beyond adding music, that they never used long exposure in their original stills, and we've begun seeing something else in the blur. We believe that their body is in the here and now, with all of us, quarantined and frustrated and maintaining social distance. But their mind, that, we believe, is in the future we'll build together, joyously, dancing, remembering those that came before us. Thank you.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much, Ilana. I'm a little in love with 6 Feet. All right, so our last reader of the evening is Alexander Ramirez, who is a doctoral candidate, and some of his writing is published or forthcoming in the Missouri Review, the Journal of American Culture, and Image Journal.
Thanks, Jamaica. Excerpt from Chapter 3, The Ghost of Victor Salas. My mom hates tattoos. She says having them can make it harder for you to get a job, but if you press her, she'll eventually say it's because they only get uglier as you get older. I don't have any tattoos. Neither do my brothers, except for Leo. Leo was born in the middle of the 5 of us. In the spring of that year, he finally turned 18 and finished high school, and then he spent all summer driving a forklift at the warehouse in Woodland that my dad supervises. He made a lot of money. Then he went to the tattoo parlor. Then he went again. He's aware of our mother's position on the subject. When we were kids, Leo was the brother who couldn't manufacture a smile for the photographers on picture day. Not till long after everybody stopped caring how ugly his portraits would turn out anyway. It's not that he was born angry. I remember he smiled a lot as a baby. He would giggle like a Pixar character. But there were a couple years where I had to train him on the school bus, telling him to just fake it for the second it would take to make mom happy. The school portraits were expensive. Richie was on the bus with us too, of course, and he would help me. We'd tell Leo, just move the muscles in your cheeks, okay? When you're in front of the guy, just pretend like we're all together. Pretend we're all joking about something. Pretend you're the actor in a movie and it's a scene where you're happy, and then act. Leo would try, I think. But whatever he accomplished with his mouth by the time the flashbulb went off would always look more like a frown. You see, Leo's been angry a long time. He's never really had the patience to explain why. I'm pretty sure he's never had an audience that'd be able to hear it either. Instead, he has 2 tattoos, one on each shoulder. So when I saw him coming out of his room, smiling from ear to ear, all I could say was, "Why do you seem so happy?" Leo showed me a pair of clean black basketball shoes. He held them up in one hand. Victor said he'd buy these off me for $200. Wanna come? The shoes were an old pair of Adidas, still valuable even though they'd been worn, by me mostly. I bought them brand new, dead stock, from an online seller after getting my first job bussing tables. I got a deal on them because they came without their original box. But then my closet got full after I got promoted, and I passed them down to Leo. My mom thinks it's funny that all 5 of us wear the same size. I said, "Victor who? Victor Salas?" And then, "He wears our shoe size too?" Leo smiled and handed me the sneakers. They don't look like other basketball shoes. They're bulky and ugly, and they're lustrous like brushed metal. They have an official name from their maker, but all the sneakerheads just refer to them as the Kobe remakes. "You can't have any of the money," Leo told me. But do you want to walk there with me? I, more than probably anything in that moment, did not want to walk with him. I had just gotten home after a morning of classes, and I was busy watching TV and thinking about what I wanted to eat next. And besides, Victor Salas was an old friend of our father's. They'd grown up together. They'd gone to the same high school. Victor was the backup quarterback at Luther Burbank, back when my dad played special teams. Their offensive line wasn't very good in those years, so Victor saw the field plenty, and if you ever hit him, and if you ever met him, you'd be able to tell right away that he got sacked a lot. Most of my brothers were too young to remember him coming around when we were little, but I wasn't. I knew Victor, and I didn't want to walk to his mom's house and make conversation with him for any amount of time. I knew what kinds of drugs he did in the 90s. I knew why he wore a blood red Kansas City Chiefs jersey, even though he claimed to be a Raiders fan. Sometimes, but not all the time, accidental poetry would fall out of his mouth. Usually the poetry came in the form of some repurposed football mantra. Victor would say, "The truth is in the dirt," or something like that. And it always seemed like it was 2 or 3 times divorced from its original context. Once, for example, at a bus stop, he lifted his shirt to scratch his belly before he told me, "You can always find a bouquet in a trash can." Stuff like that. Mostly, though, he spoke like an idiot, and you could never really tell if you were in the presence of the man or his ghost. But $200 was a little more than twice what I'd paid for the Kobe remake some years ago. And the more I rolled all the information around in my head, the more I realized that I did want some of that money. So I picked up the remote to turn off the TV and said, "If I can trick that old crackhead Victor into paying more than $200 for the shoes, will I get to keep the difference?" And I was mostly kidding, but then I saw how fast my little brother's eyes lit up, and the way he was smiling again from ear to ear, you could tell there was no way, it was just an act. We threw the shoes in a grocery bag from the pantry, a nice one, a paper one, and started walking through the guts of our neighborhood. Victor and his mom didn't live far. From our place to their place was about a 25-minute walk, less if you were on your way to pick up some cash. I was swinging the paper bag at my side when I decided to ask Leo how Victor had contacted him. He just said, "On the internet," and kept it moving. As we crossed the street, I asked him if he remembered much about Victor. Leo told me, "Only stories." I tripped on a crack in the pavement as we stepped over the next curb. Leo looked back and decided to elaborate. "He liked my tattoos," he said. "He left a comment on a picture I put up and we started talking." My brother rubbed his shoulders, caressing his ink. "You know," he said, "on the internet." Leo was wearing a white cotton beater. Tank top undershirts had become an unofficial part of his uniform around the house since late summer. On his right arm, underneath the slow half circles he made with his hand, I could see his tattoo of one of the AFL logos of the former Oakland Raiders. He dropped his hands, and the domed face of his right deltoid was a clean, neutral canvas for the Pirate's head, the one with the all-black leather helmet against the brown pigskin backdrop. It mattered to Leo that it was the AFL, that it was Oakland. Even the crossed swords behind the head looked sharp. Then he turned around and started backpedaling down the street so I could get a good look at his left shoulder. He'd got the Mexican coat of arms done there. Not the regular one on the regular flag, though, the liquid gold one on the one they have on the flags that stand in government offices and banks and other nice places. It cost him a little more than the Raiders tattoo, but Leo got his money's worth. The ink glittered in the sun. We had to pause at an intersection to let a Monte Carlo make a turn, and Leo stood there, flexing his left arm at me. I watched the golden eagle eat the golden serpent alive, and then we kept going. We crossed through the park and walked past the corner laundromat, and when Victor's mom's house appeared on the other side of Florin Road, a pale yellow square with blue eaves that looked like a child's crayon drawing of a house, the legendary Victor Salas materialized in the driveway, his bald head creeping into view behind the trunk of his mother's old station wagon. "Little Leo," he said from the distance, "and little Enrique." We crossed to his side of the street. Victor had been squatting in the driveway, scoring the new license plate tag on the station wagon with a key. That way, he said, the sticker couldn't be stolen. He came forward to slap hands with Leo and pull him in for a hug. Victor was wearing an alternate black Lakers jersey without a t-shirt underneath. His being born and raised in Sacramento and loving the LA Lakers irritated me as much as anything about him, and I would often tell him when I would see him as a kid that I was glad we had poisoned Kobe Bryant's cheeseburger when he was in town for a 2002 playoff game against the Kings. Victor's stupid-ass Lakers jersey left his soft arms bare and all the water-colored blue and bleeding ink in his skin exposed. The sight of it would have given my mother a migraine. It was impossible to tell what any of his jailhouse tattoos might have said when he got them. "Little Enrique," he said, again, turning to me and smoothing down his mustache with his thumb. "How come you never wave when you see me riding around on my bike?" On the way over, I had decided that I could try to convince Victor to give up an extra $50 for the shoes. I knew he could get it from his mom. I had even queued up some of the prices for other used pairs that were available online. I figured I could trick him the same way I tricked large parties at the restaurant into buying more wine bottles. The creases on the toes of Leo's Kobe's were almost invisible, and the soles were still attached by the original glue. $50 was about what you could walk away with on the slowest night at the restaurant, so that sounded good enough for me. But after hearing Victor call me by my dad's name not once but twice, I figured I should bully him into giving me an even $300. "Well, you know my name is Henry," I said, "so that might be part of it." Victor just smirked and hissed. "Come on, man," he said. "Where's the money?" I said, shaking the brown paper bag in his face. "Because I know you don't ride that bike to work." I could feel Leo starting to regret bringing me along already. I felt his eyes on me. I knew if I turned my head and saw them, I might relent, so I locked in on Victor. I mean, it was fine. Leo knew. He knows that as long as I haven't slipped off my watch yet, I'm cool. Victor smacked his lips at me. "Why are you already talking shit?" he said. "You know I take care of my mom." Victor gestured at their lawn and let his arms fall back to his sides. You could tell it had been cut recently. You could smell it too. The bottom of their chain-link fence fanned outward, like it always had, like a skirt, because Victor had been slamming their lawnmower into it for the past 30 years. "You guys don't want to come inside?" he said, beginning to float up the driveway. "Just chill out, slow down. I got the money in my room." When I looked over at Leo, he had already started up the driveway toward the open garage door. I had been inside their house many times before, many years ago. My dad only took Richie and me because we were the only ones old enough to watch ourselves when Victor would have friends over for pay-per-views. I could remember that Victor's mom was always planted on that couch in the living room watching daytime television. She liked the shows that we liked, the ones where they had to read off the results of lie detector and paternity tests, the ones with the fake judges too. The same stuff I still watched and had been watching at home when Leo asked me to take a walk with him. So we followed Victor inside, and he led us through the kitchen and into their living room. I'd always liked visiting as a kid because I thought Victor's mom had the largest collection of VHS tapes in the world, more than the library, it seemed like, more than my dad. There were movies, home movies, cartoons. Richie and I loved that she had piles of magazines and supermarket tabloids all over her coffee table. While my dad drank beer in the garage, Victor's mom would let us go through her movies and flip through her magazines. She didn't care how much we touched them. She never ever said much, but sometimes she'd feed us. And as we walked in and I saw the living room again, Victor's mom was sitting on the same floral couch she rests on in all my memories. She was facing the same wall and the same gigantic television. The pit bulls they kept in their kitchen behind a 6-panel gate were all different, and their wallpaper had yellowed somewhat. But most of the magazines on the coffee table were the exact same ones I'd read when I was little. That's my excerpt. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was really moving. Well, I would like to thank all the readers again, Ilana, Alex, and Oh-vee for blessing us with their stories. I can't think of a better way to start the weekend. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I'd also like to give a shout out to Katie Maria again for taking care of the tech, and the other organizers, Jonathan Wlodarski and Jess Polai. And we hope you will all join us April 23rd for our last No Name reading of the semester. Thank you for coming. See you next time.